A Course in Miracles Lesson 4 from the perspective of Best Way to Divorce. These thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. Unlike the preceding ones, these exercises do not begin with the idea for the day. In these practice periods, begin with noting the thoughts that are crossing your mind for about a minute. Then apply the idea to them. If you are already aware of unhappy thoughts, use them as subjects for the idea. Do not, however, select only the thoughts you think are bad. You will find, if you train yourself to look at your thoughts, that they represent such a mixture that in a sense none of them can be called good or bad. This is why they do not mean anything. In selecting the subjects for the application of today's idea, the usual specificity is required. Do not be afraid to use good thoughts as well as bad. None of them represents your real thoughts, which are being covered up by them. The good ones are but shadows of what lies beyond, and shadows make sight difficult. The bad ones are blocks to sight and make seeing impossible. You do not want either. This is a major exercise and will be repeated from time to time in somewhat different form. The aim here is to train you in the first steps toward the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. It is a first attempt in the long-range purpose of learning to see the meaningless as outside you and the meaningful within. It is also the beginning of training your mind to recognize what is the same and what is different. In using your thoughts for the application of the idea for today, identify each thought by the central figure or event it contains. For example, this thought about X does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room, on this street, and so on. You can also use the idea for a particular thought that you recognize as harmful. This practice is useful, but it is not a substitute for the more random procedures to be followed for the exercises. Do not, however, examine your mind for more than a minute or so. You are too inexperienced as yet to avoid a tendency to become pointlessly preoccupied. Further, since these exercises are the first of their kind, you may find the suspension of judgment in connection with thoughts particularly difficult. Do not repeat these exercises more than 3 or 4 times during the day. We will return to them later. So, for example, this thought about those curtains does not mean anything. Would be a bit specific because it's probably not something that's going through your head. More likely, this thought about my neighbour does not mean anything. It is like the things I see in this room, on this street. My thoughts about Christmas or the turkey does not mean anything. It's like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. These thoughts about my children does not mean anything. It's like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place. These thoughts about my behaviour or my mood do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, or in this place. So beware of judgment, because just in the same way as in previous lessons, we realise that everything we look at and everything we think about, we have preconceptions and perceptions about, making them very loaded. They don't just exist as meaningless objects because we give them so much meaning. In the same way, the thoughts that go through our head will be often about things that we have loaded with a great deal of meaning and judgment. So we're practicing here without becoming, as the lesson says, pointlessly preoccupied. We're practicing to train our mind to see what is the same and what is different. The first steps towards the goal of separating the meaningless from the meaningful. And first of all, we need to accept that there are many things that preoccupy us, give us feelings and emotions that in themselves, maybe they are meaningless. And that can be difficult to accept. But being able to not detach from, but separate what is meaningful and what is not is part of this mind training. And I've always found it particularly useful with thoughts that are triggering. You know, when you get really lost thinking about your ex or the kids or your job or whatever it is that's causing you stress, and to be able to let that pass by in your mind and to tell yourself, this does not mean anything. And to link that with how that meaninglessness is rather like looking around the room and recognizing that you don't recognize, I don't give meaning to anything else. Because of course we do. And that's why we get so triggered and upset by things. So learning these techniques may seem odd if you've not done them before, but they are far more difficult than they sound. And they are part of that pathway to release and freedom. And they take constant practice, which is why once you finish all of these lessons, you may find yourself going back to the beginning and starting all over again. So these thoughts that are passing through my mind as I sit quietly for a moment, these thoughts do not mean anything. They are like the things I see in this room, on this street, from this window, in this place.